Welcome, welcome. I am joined by Mustafa Shreet. Hello, Mustafa. Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much for having me today. Thank you.
So we are going to talk about hiring people, and you are now representing the community in hiring at Silicon Roundabout.
Correct.
Why don't you just give everybody a bit of background about Silicon Roundabout? Because I think quite a few people have heard about it, and it's always sounded like a bit of an offshoot of Silicon Valley, but in a sort of slightly reductionist, British, modest fashion. But talk to me about Silicon Roundabout and the community there, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so Silicon, okay, so it's interesting actually because everybody has probably heard of Silicon Roundabout. Anybody who is in tech probably has heard of Silicon Roundabout. And it is what Silicon Roundabout is, the old street roundabout, basically, where all the tech startups take place. A lot of people have heard of the community Silicon Roundabout, but they don't necessarily know what it is we do, et cetera, et cetera. So the community Silicon Roundabout that we are is actually one of the largest tech communities in Europe.
Wow.
We now have almost 15,000 members. It's basically a safe haven for developers. We started out 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, as just a meetup, really, for developers. The founder, Francesco, he started out as just pizzas, drinks, catch up for developers. The whole idea is that developers who are actually with an entrepreneurial flair to discuss opportunities, see if there are any startup opportunities, etc., etc. And it just grew via word of mouth. It just kept on expanding and expanding to what it is today. But now, obviously, we do a lot more than just, it's not just the community, it is the community, but we do also other things to help the tech community, whether it's the developer side or whether it's the startup side.
I mean, so this has become an exceptionally powerful resource, and actually all credit to Francesco because he's Italian, so he's come here and he's grown one of Europe's largest tech communities in London, which is unbelievable. And so the nature of the early events that they would do, I mean, pizzas and alike, did people kind of found companies together with each other? I mean,
Really, people come in and they network, but the event started to take a more interesting turn. So we, as a community, started to have more activity. So we actually not just a network gathering really for people to network and chat and eat and drink. It was more, we started to have tech talks, bring some tech leaders from various organizations, ideally startups who have reached the scale up level, because that's essentially what it was all about, tech within startups and tech and startups. And then we started to do hackathons, tech debates. So more interesting type of events for people to attend. And, it's something that takes place usually pre-COVID after work, 6, 7 p.m. So it's something for them to look forward to a few times a month, various different events. The tech talk can be once a month, and then another one's can be just networking. Some other one just discussing, startups, etc., etc. So it was just a variety of different events to try and keep the community going initially. But we had to adjust that as the community grew. We had to do different types of events, make it more interesting, to meet the demand of the community as it was growing.
well, and you've been faced with the same challenge I have, having been involved in sort of startups for about 10 years, which is the ecosystem and the environment and the types of startups we're creating have changed over time as well. So no formula sort of holds true for too long because, blockchain didn't exist 3, 4, 5 years ago in the UK, and suddenly you're going to have lots of startups that focus on that. So that's the scene set for Silicon Roundabout. Your background and entry to joining them, where did you start and how did you get into it?
So it's funny actually because I joined Silicon Roundabout pretty much end of 2018, start of 2019, and it's funny because the way it happened was Francesco reaching out to me on LinkedIn, and I've been following Silicon Roundabout for a while. I know what's going on. I'm keeping up with the community because given what I did or I've been doing in my career, which is hiring, recruiting in tech, working in-house in HR, but within tech, you can't not follow Silicon Roundabout. So he reaches out to me on LinkedIn and, explains to me what the current situation of Silicon Roundabout, and they are actually looking to cement a hiring service as part of the community due to the demand, because a lot of the startups that have been reaching out to the community or part of the community kept saying, look, can you help us? One of the events that you organize, maybe reach out to people who are interested in your opportunities, because we're hiring and we're looking to build our tech teams. But, as a startup, A, we don't have the capital to splash out a lot of money on huge hiring fees. And B, the issue with traditional hiring methods, such as outsourcing to recruitment agencies or independent recruiters, is that they don't always understand the tech side of things. And they are, as a startup, they also need assistance deciding what is they need. So what in as basic as what should the job description look like? This is the kind of person we're looking for, but put it on paper and get people interested to discuss with us. So that was something Francesco was adamant to add to the community, and that's when he reached out to me and he said very bluntly, "This is how it is. I saw your profile. I really liked it." The reason he liked it was actually because I also am a developer as well. So I'm a former developer. I don't develop anymore. But he said, "You're a developer. You come from a tech background. You also do tech hiring. Can we have a chat? Would this be of interest?" It was so blunt. It was ridiculous, which you wouldn't think that because he's Italian. Italians aren't usually blunt, straight to the point, but he was.
But he is a developer, and they sometimes cut straight to the.
Exactly, went straight to it, and I said, "Yeah, of course, let's have a chat." We chatted a week later, and I joined Silicon Roundabout since then, basically, and I've headed up this side of Silicon Roundabout, organizing everything to do with helping startups find the right people, whether it's through events, whether it's us doing it in various different ways. That's been what I've been doing for Silicon Roundabout for the past pretty much 2 years now.
Okay. And how easy was it to get it going off the ground? Because there's always this amazing sort of feeling when you create a startup or an idea internally out of demand, because you know that it's almost a no-brainer to deliver on it. People are asking for it, and then you just need to do things up. So getting the wheels turning, I mean, how difficult was that originally?
It's still challenging. I'll say that it is still challenging, but it was very, very challenging at the start. And you wouldn't think it would be, given the demand that Silicon Roundabout had, given that many startups would approach the community and say, "Please, can you help us?" As in, literally, they go through, at the time, our process of vetting the startups to see what they really need wasn't as efficient as it is today. Yet they went through the entire process just to see what we can do. And what the community can actually do. But when it comes down to it, the difficulty has always been that a lot of these startups have been hard done by certain recruitment agencies, whoever they are, I don't know who they are. And they now have, like in their mind, they're turned off from anything to do with the word recruitment or recruiting. They just don't want that because they've had bad experiences. So as soon as we said, "Look, we can help you," we had to really go through the whole cycle of explaining how what we are doing is exactly what you asked us to do. And we're not actually a recruitment agency. And then we had to go through the cycle of cementing the idea that Silicon Roundabout as a community, it's still what it is. It's simply providing that extra help now for startups or organizations in general, but primarily startups, to get them to find the right people, connected them to the right people. The way we work is completely different to almost anything else out there. And it worked fantastically well. But that was the challenge, to get that up to speed and to really, in fact, get the community on board with the fact that we are doing that, but we're not turning into a recruitment agency. You have to look at things from a developer's perspective. Developers do tend to have some negative feelings towards the word recruiter because most recruiters, unfortunately, don't necessarily have the tech knowledge required to be able to speak with the developers and understand what they do.
Well, I presume that they just smash a load of keywords into LinkedIn, find them, and then spam them.
And not just LinkedIn, it's job boards. So if you are a developer and you put your CV on any job board, it could be any job, you're going to get bombarded with calls throughout. Right. Your phone will not stop ringing. And in many cases, it would be many recruiters from different agencies calling about the exact same role. And in some of those cases, unfortunately, that agency hasn't even been authorized by the company to reach out on their behalf. So there is bad blood there, if you like.
Well, because also I think that they're kind of like a hot ticket item, right? Because I think it's really easy in your head to go, what programming language do we need? X. What programming language does this person do? X. Therefore, there's going to be a good fit. And with sales, you think, oh, maybe it's a personality thing. Maybe there's these other things. But you're like, here's somebody who can code. They've got this much experience, blah, blah, off the programming test. And we should print money as the recruiter potentially. And there's obviously good fees to be commanded by some of the positions.
They charge high, the fees are quite, as a company, if I am a recruitment agency, then, I'd be very happy because the fees I'm charging are really good. They're circa 20%, 18, 20%. Some of them can be much higher. It's and the percentage, just to explain, that's usually a percent of the person's first year salary. And look, don't get me wrong. What I'm not trying to say here that recruiters aren't good at what they do. Recruiters are very good at finding, a profile that matches, or perhaps a CV that would match certain keywords that you've looked for. It's what they do. But the downside, or where they fall, I suppose, short, is on the tech side. You can't really do that with tech professionals. If you don't understand the job, well, you can't see through the CV, which means you've ruled out many people, because as developers, a lot of them don't necessarily tend to put a very well put together CV, well written CV. So you can't necessarily see through those lines. And also, just because you've seen some keywords doesn't mean that person is actually good enough for this kind of role. So this is the downside, and that's what the developers have, suffered from, which is why one of the challenges we've had is telling them, look, we're not turning into that. We're still the community. Everyone here is a developer. And I had to convince people of me. So when Francesco brought me on board, they said, oh yeah, he's a recruiter. But no, I am. But I'm a developer as well. Like, I had to get people to actually buy into me. I remember speaking to one of the guys at Oracle. They were at one of our events, and we were having a fantastic chat. Techie chat, can't remember exactly what we were talking about, but it was going fantastically well. Until I said to him that I actually work in recruitment, or part of my job is to recruit. And I don't think he realized at the time yet I was actually part of Silicon Roundabout. You should see his face, how it turned. He literally turned and he just walked off, immediately walked off. I was just gobsmacked. What just happened? So that was a challenge for me personally, getting into Silicon Roundabout and then convincing the community we are still who we are. We're still the community, but we're doing something extra.
Yeah, that's it. Because look, I think on the flip side, I think too much can be asked of the generosities of community as well. It's like, look, you are all here. This is great. And it's a sort of old, now we're asking for something the business isn't cool anymore, or it's lost its ethos or whatever. But it's like, look, if you want us to just chuck up an apathetic jobs board for you and let you self-serve it and just become an absolute scrum of whatever, you're going to get the same output, which is that we don't make anything off it. It's going to be badly curated, and actually, I don't know. Does that help the community? And I think it's like, look, there is a side offering. You do the community stuff for as long as you want. You don't have to touch this. But if you suddenly hear about a really cool job in deep tech or whatever that you'd never heard about before. So I was working on a client recently that is working on satellite technology. It's like, if you've got someone in your community who otherwise never would have heard about that, it's like, then you have given them an opportunity to change their career. But when it comes to, let's say, hiring mistakes around getting tech talent or even understanding them better, I mean, what are people doing wrong? And, should we be obliged to go to people's GitHub profiles to better understand the work that they output, for instance?
Well, where to start? Things people are doing wrong. Where to start? A lot of things are being done wrong. A lot of things. And it starts, and I'm probably going to keep saying this until I'm grey. My hair turns grey because it's just a challenge and an issue that companies always face, and the mistakes they always make. Deciding on what do they really need. So in many cases, and when I say many cases, I'm probably talking about most cases, particularly within startups, companies don't actually know what they want. I mean,
Yeah.
they know in their mind, we need somebody to do this and that. We need them to wear this number of different hats, which is perfectly fine. That's great. It's normal. It's your needs, and there's nothing wrong with that. The mistake here is actually putting it on paper. They don't tend to put it on paper properly. So when they are going out, they're not really reaching out to the right people. And then what's worse, the people that are going out aren't actually in a position to have that chat with that person. So if you're a startup and you're a CEO, let's just say, and you're looking for your CTO, it's okay for you to not necessarily know all the tech background. If you've outsourced your tech so far, that's fine. It's not your remit. If you're trying to hire developers, so you don't necessarily have a CTO and you're looking for developers, before you take a big step as a CTO, you just want to bring some work in-house, then it's really difficult being able to communicate. There's always a gap here, whether it's the founders, whether it's the HR team internally, and that's usually the worst if they have an internal HR team or a recruitment team. And whether they go and outsource, it's the communication with developers, understanding really how to translate what you want on paper and relating it to them, to the developers, to make it seem interesting enough to them, and to show them that actually there's an opportunity here for you, and for you to even decide who to approach. Because as a startup, you can't always afford to say, okay, I need somebody to tick all my boxes. Yeah, fantastic. You can, of course, do that. You can go to somebody who's, on probably 100K plus salary. But that's not really what you want. You could pay somebody £40,000 a year or £50,000 a year, and they do the exact same job you need perfectly well. But you don't necessarily know that yet. So there is actually understanding what you want, and then there is reaching out to the right people, because you don't have that tech knowledge, which is, again, where we always come in and say, look, this is where we help out with, because we know the community, we speak with the community, we know who does what, and we connect them with you, if you like. So, these two, I suppose, they're a couple of the biggest mistakes companies made. But I can go on. There's a number of mistakes that they make, and we highlight them in our events all the time so that we can help them out, say, don't do this, don't do that.
It's true. I think this is also true of data science. When somebody brings in a data engineer or a data scientist and they're actually not sure what they're trying to accomplish with their data exploration anywhere, or it's not ready for investigation. So the person comes in for 3 to 6 months, tries to basically get all the pipeline of data flow through the company working, and then the person who's hired them is frustrated because they're like, oh, you haven't waved your magic wand. And the person who's working for them is frustrated because it's like, I can't really, add my value here. So what would you say about people who just sort of miscellaneously say, I want to hire somebody who's full stack? Like, is that a good thing to do? Or is that just a catch-all phrase to try and get an everyman hire who is like that kind of mythical item?
Make miracles, do miracles, basically.
Exactly.
The one person can wear all hats. But like I said earlier, there's nothing wrong with a company wanting, they have a need, but they have to be realistic about it. At the same time, they have to be quite realistic. Do you really? You say, I want somebody who can just who can do everything, but while this person could exist, you're going to have to splash a lot of money. What you can't do is say, I want somebody who does everything, and I want somebody, and I want that person now, ASAP, and I want them to be as cheap as possible. It's the usual triangle. If we always discuss it with companies and so on, the equality, cost, time triangle. You can't have it all. You have to have the sweet spot is the center, where it's a little bit of everything. But what you can't
Mhm.
have is absolutely everything. It doesn't work like that. If you look at what you really need, then analyze and say, okay, well, maybe we can split that up, over 2 people, 3 people, perhaps, varied levels of experience. It doesn't have to be somebody who's just worked for 10 years in startups and knows exactly what it is. You're taking a risk yourself in this startup. You're investing in this startup. So it makes no sense that you wouldn't want to invest in the staff that you have as well. The people you're going to bring on board, you have to be able to give them a chance to deliver what you want them to deliver, which in many cases they can do that. But startups just needs to be a bit more open-minded about that. And this is what we keep advocating all the time. Part of what we do is actually we give a lot of free clinics and advices to startups. Say, look, come to us. We're happy to give you, free advice because it's part of the community still. And we say, look, what's your problem here? How have you decided? Have you thought about dividing that workload? Have you decided? You looked at perhaps even bringing interns for free along with an experienced person? Make as many uses as you can of things that could be available to you, but you have to. Unfortunately, you have to have a budget for certain things. You can't get everything for free. Sadly, you can't. If you want it, then you have to do the work yourself. If you're not a developer, you're going to have to bring someone like that. And if you want to hire these people and you don't want to, let's just say, pay a cost of hire, you'll have to do it yourself. Which brings the question is, do you really know how to get to those people? Which is, again, the challenge that most startups face.
What are the expectations out in the market currently for, let's say, I don't want to be too brittle or minimalistic with this, but let's say at different stages of seniority, what kind of price would you be paying for each of those, and what time does equity start coming into the discussion, typically from what you've experienced so far?
That's it's funny because that's a question we get asked a lot. The answer is there isn't really a sort of a line or a trend to describe that, especially not within our community. I'll explain why. I'll give an example. We had a CTO, a company who wanted a CTO. Now they were pre-seed; they haven't even gone through their first round yet, and they wanted that CTO to complete their set of C level so that they can go out and they have all the expertise they need when they're reaching out to investors. But they did have a product. It was all outsourced, and the idea of the CTO is to bring that in-house. So that person will be hands-on CTO, doing everything until they hire the next developer, which will be a few months after the funding round goes through. Now, this person, CTO, from the community, is, prior to that, salary level around £130,000, basic salary. Then there's obviously bonuses, etc., shares, etc., etc. Now, he's taken the role with this company at £50,000 a year. With the idea was that salary will increase after funding round, but it's not going to increase straight away to that optimal level. It'll slowly get there. He will get some shares. But what I'm trying to explain is that person took that drop because that person believed in the product and they believed in the founder and the CEO. So what I'm saying here is, especially within the community that we have, it's not a case of how much are we looking to spend. It's a case of you need to have a budget, okay, but we need to attract the right person for you. That's the thing. The right person is somebody who could take a pay cut to join you because they believe in you, because you've pitched to them as you would with investors to join you on board. You'll give them some shares. These conversations can be had with people individually, but what you can't expect is somebody to come in and, for example, work full-time for you, be that employee you want, just for sweat equity, especially these days, unless that person has, financial backing on their own that they can sustain themselves, which is not very many of them, not very many of them around these days, especially in COVID.
So you'd almost say it's the problems that they, at a certain level, it's actually the problems that they want to solve rather than just picking up paychecks. But surely at the junior level, let's say, first job out of uni type computer science or self-taught at like early 20s. I mean, what would they be being hired at if we were talking about interns who are tech savvy?
What would you say that again? Sorry, I didn't
So
catch the question.
tech savvy interns or early stage employees out of university, they must be a bit more standardized, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of salary wise, you mean in terms of
Yeah.
payment wise? Yeah, I mean that's entry level, and at the moment, these salaries, they can be somewhere in the late 20s, early 30s, really. It depends on the type of company. Some companies will offer 29, 30. Some companies will offer 25, 26, and they can't afford to pay more than that. Like I said, it will depend on case by case scenario, but in many cases, the startups actually need that level of experience. You tell them, okay, look, you can go ahead and get an intern for a while, and some people would happily work temporarily for no pay. I'm not sure about these days, to be honest. It's very difficult, but temporarily as they gain more actual work experience. But if you want the more experienced people, you're going to have to pay something. You have to see what they need and give them that. It's very rare that you'll find somebody who's willing to work free completely for sweat equity. They have to really believe in you and in the product. But it's a case by case scenario.
Why don't you also talk to me through your process at Silicon Roundabout of how you engage? So a client comes to you, they're super excited to get hold of the community, and how you give them the best service you can to get hold of the right people for them.
Well, I suppose it's really exciting for us when we do that. Whenever we get a new company on board that we're helping out. Excuse me. Reason being, we go into a partnership with that company. Like I said, at the Silicon Roundabout is still a community. So every time we work with a new startup, we introduce them to the community. We welcome them on board to the community. So what we do for them is not just connect them with people, we're actually raising their employer profile within the community. And when I say within the community, it's not just within our community, because we're blessed that Silicon Roundabout, many people have heard of it, and word of mouth spreads quite quickly. So when we raise a company's profile within the community, in a matter of weeks, the wider tech community has probably heard about it because we've raised that profile high enough. So what we do is we conduct events, which is the essence of what Silicon Roundabout is, really. Unfortunately, these days they're just webinars; they're not actual events, sadly. But we bring the startup's top figures. We're talking about whether it's the CEO, the CTO, the tech leads, whoever the top figures are, people, and we connect them with the community via events. We interview these guys. We write a special piece about them. We send out to the community. We include them in our newsletter, talk about that company, what they're doing, while they're revolutionizing here, what problems are they solving, and while we're doing that, we are also reaching out to the community to see who would match what they would want and connect them with them directly. Now, essentially, part of what we do is similar to what a recruitment agency would do, in the sense that we are looking for profiles in a pool, if you like, which is in this case our community, and we're trying to match them with the startup. Obviously, where we're different is that we developers ourselves, so we understand who to speak with. We know how to connect them with the startup and the actual employer branding itself, connecting them with the people, getting to have that first conversation. When we worked with Monzo, for example, I think they took 15 people or 8 people from just one event, from that single event. They came in, had that event, and they took 8 people from just that event. No questions asked. Reason being, we brought the right people on board. The tech people were there from Monzo in the event. They've had that chat with these people live. We've organized a hackathon. We've organized certain activities. They've seen who can do what. They've determined the level of that person, and they've just simply taken them on board then and there. And this is where we are different. Had had Silicon Roundabout not had everything it has now, which is the reach, the people that we have as part of the community, and ourselves really as, with the technology that we have, that wouldn't have been possible.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I suppose, how we work. And it's beneficial for startups as well, because you're trying to raise your brand awareness. You want people to be aware of who you are, whether you've just raised funds or whether you're about to raise funds. You want people to know who you are. Mm-hmm. The higher your profile, the better. And that's exactly what we do. And it can be as many events as we have to ensure that they get the right people.
I do agree with you on this, because our job at Angel Investment Network is you have the startup effectively out with their money tin asking for something. And obviously, whenever you ask for something, you're in a position of slight weakness versus the other person on the other side of the negotiation. But by creating a marketplace for their idea, sharing the story, sharing the investment case, the nice thing that we get is investors will then self-qualify their interest. They just are presented the information and they come back to us and say, that seems really cool. In the same way, if you present your information to the community and then a bunch of developers come back and go, my God, that's a really cool problem to solve, then they're halfway sold in. It's much better than if you try and grab somebody and pull them into the role and they think, well, if you're going to do this, I'm going to be less reasonable about salary expectations, work this, that, the other, and maybe I won't even stick with the job. Whereas we always find that it is better when people are on the front foot and they can both meet somewhere on a little bit more of a mutually beneficial ground.
Absolutely. I mean, we've not talked about this. We're not going to get into that because this is a huge topic. But retention is an important aspect of the talent people cycle within a startup. You need to retain your staff as much as possible, and unless your staff are bought into you, the last thing you want is people who are just desperate for a job and they just want a job and they join you for that. You want people who are actually sold into the idea, bought into the idea, sold by the idea, bought into your idea, your vision, what you're trying to achieve, and ideally into the founders themselves. As a startup, that's what you need: people on board with your journey to help you accomplish that. I mean, if you look at what's the word? What was that company called? ClearScore, for example. When they first started, they had a number of people with them in a room, and they were just bought into that. They were contractors, and they were bought into the idea. They were bought in to try and bring ClearScore from where it was to what it is. But once it basically took off, they were like, well, do you know what? I've done my job. You no longer technically need us now. You're much bigger. I want to go out and join another startup now. This is what I like. This is what I enjoy doing. And that's the essence of our community. Our community is built of people like that. They want to be bought into a vision. They want to be bought into a company and help it launch. And the best way to do it is, getting the two together. You end up getting your staff, the right people. You won't have to worry about losing them. And you have people dedicated to your vision, your mission. Because the last thing you want is people who are just working 9 to 5 days a week in a startup. Let's be honest, no one in a startup works 9 to 5 days a week. No one.
Yeah. That's not a thing.
It's just not a thing.
Yeah.
And if you're in a startup, you know that. And there is a buzz from working in a startup. There is that. And you want people to enjoy that. You don't want someone who's there, I'm just here for the paycheck. I do my job probably well, but I'm here for the paycheck. Doesn't gel in well with the startup environment, I'm afraid.
Well, I had a good conversation with Dan Glazer from Wilson Sonsini, and we were talking about the American tech scene. And he was just saying how bad the tech poaching at Silicon Valley's got. And, you've got so many developers being courted out of big tech to anybody's company. They've raised big venture rounds, so they get paid phenomenally well. And of course, that is then passed on to the amount of money that the company needs to keep raising in the future, which one good thing about the UK is I think we've got access through communities like your own to some really amazing tech talent who we actually don't have to pay considerably over the odds for, and can make some really good stuff, which is amazing. What's COVID done to people's recruitment expectations? Do you have more developers saying we'd like, more time at home? Can you send us our computer set up to my home office now rather than me having to commute for an hour, or what's the trend there?
From working from home, we've been advocates not just for working from home, but for flexibility of working. Especially if you're a startup, and for developers in general. What you want from your developer is the work done properly. You want them to do the work properly. And, you know, different developers have different spaces that they prefer working in. So what you can't do, excuse me, is force them to just say you have to be here 5 days a week, all day, whatever. If they're happy to come in. That's fine. This is the office. Come in. But we always say, look, flexibility of working. Allow them that freedom so that they can work wherever they want. They can focus wherever they want. COVID has helped with that because obviously people aren't going to the office anymore. Simple as that. They haven't gone for months in many cases. Although, funny enough, some people are actually starting to go back to the office. Even though we are in a lockdown now, some companies are actually operating from the office still. Right. Have gone back to the office. Not obviously fully, but limited number of people at one time. But it is happening. And, you know, it just pushed the companies in the direction to say, or to see that, look, the work can be done remotely. You don't need people here to do the job. This is such an old-fashioned mentality existing takes us back to the 80s, not even the 90s. It's just no longer the same. It's not applicable anymore. But it took COVID for the managers to believe that, to actually be, okay, the work is being done. Fantastic. And I think, you know, we've taken a turn on that. So much so, in fact, that I think Deutsche Bank, I don't know if you've read that, there's a news article from Deutsche Bank. They've released a study, one of the departments, saying that we should demand a tax on working from home. That if you work from home, you should pay a 5% tax of that specific daily income, because you're not commuting, you're not contributing to the economy. So it's a bit crazy.
I beg to differ. I think people's income tax, but yeah, I mean,
no, of course it is, because you're paying for heating, you're paying for a lot of different things. But that's their logic. But that argument came from the fact that we have taken such a turn on working from home. That's it. It's been realized, and companies are now realizing that that's it. We can do the work. We can save money. We don't have to have everybody in the office at the same time. We probably don't have to have a big enough office. We can save money on that as well. Probably even on equipment, really, because if they can work from home, we'll just supply them with a laptop, let's just say, or whatever set they need. But we don't have to have everything here in-house. So it's cheaper for us, as well as insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely think we've turned a turn there. Absolutely.
It's all part of the trust discussion. Way. Yeah. It's all part of the ongoing. It's all part of the ongoing trust discussion, I think, between, because there is like this uncertainty between people who are not technical and people who are, because again, you can't tell what they're doing, and you actually aren't. You're pretty powerless if they're building your tech stack, and the only thing you've got is the promise of releasing your first iteration of the product. It's like
what you want to be in, ideally, the position you want to be in is having somebody in a startup, having somebody acting as your CTO, if you like. Now, people think, oh yeah, CTO. No, CTO, like a hands-on CTO. Depends on what level you are as a startup. Just because somebody has the title CTO doesn't mean all they do around is just sit back and, you know, paperwork and meetings. I said, no, they would be physically doing the work. They're like a senior developer, if you like. But acting as your CTO, because they can communicate with you. That's, you know, they have that skill, they have that experience that they can communicate with you and communicate what the team is actually doing, what the performance is like. So that's their job, is to really communicate with the developers and then communicate with the board or the whoever's in charge to report on the progress. You need that. Every startup needs that. In fact, if you don't have that person who can do that communication, you will struggle as a startup. Because how can you communicate? You won't know exactly what their needs, what their requirements are, what the issues they're having, and they will struggle because you're not understanding them.
Well, I'm in complete agreement with you in terms of, I do believe that flexibility of work is super important. I'm a big advocate of that in terms of people's productivity. So is there room for part-time CTOs in, let's say you don't have the resource to hire somebody for 6 figures plus? Do you see a culture of, 1 day, 2 day a week CTOs that people hire so they can project manage the junior developers? Or is it just not pragmatic to do that?
No, I think we've actually seen it. In fact, I think we're
Okay.
seeing it. In fact, we are seeing it where you bring in a CTO, exactly as you mentioned, for about maybe 2 days a week or so on contract basis. You'd agree with them to deliver exactly what you just said. To have
Mm.
that, be able to oversee everything, oversee the project, the work that's being done, but they're not there every single day. There's definitely demand for that. Startups will benefit from that because this person acting as a CTO, they're most likely are acting CTO for a number of different startups.
Hmm.
So what you as a startup will benefit from is that experience of that person throughout their career, basically, as well as experience from other startups. They can give you the benefits of that. How to save, how to be more efficient, what can we do here, ideas, etc., etc. You will get that. As you grow, you will need somebody more permanent, but at a
Hmm.
certain stage, of course it's viable, and there's no harm in doing it. By all means, they should consider it, in fact, because it leaves them more money to put into developers who will do the legwork, which
Yeah.
is in most cases what they need.
And one of the last questions I'll ask you, and look, maybe you don't have any insight on this, but I think it's something that is a bit of a black box. These coding tests that people go through, do you give them a bunch of coding tests? Which ones are typically used? How effective are they in terms of getting somebody to fit into a role? What's the landscape of those at the moment?
Um, so I'm not against, and I will never say that I'm against a coding test in general. What I am against, however, is how they're being used. That's the issue here. And this is an entire topic that we can obviously discuss, which is about your talent strategy as a company, okay, or candidate experience, talent experience. In most cases, those companies demand that the candidate do a coding test at the very start of the process, literally the very, very start of the process, before sometimes they even do anything. They have to answer certain questions before they even are allowed to submit the CV. Then they submit, that they have a chat with the HR person or the recruiter person who, in most cases, has absolutely no idea what tech is about.
Hmm.
They've not done the job. It's not their job. Nothing against them. It's just not their job. It's simple. Their job, they could be fantastic at what it is, but it's different. And then they ask this person to do the test. And then that test is probably viewed by somebody on the tech side from the company, but they've not had a chat with the person directly. So that's where I'm against using that, or I'm against how it's being used. The
Hmm.
best way to probably use a coding test is once you've chatted with the candidate, you had a really good chat. It's like a final step, if you like. If you are a tech hiring manager, a tech lead, and you can't really figure out whether this person is good enough to proceed to the very final stage, then you probably shouldn't be a tech hiring manager in the first place.
Yeah.
It's just how it is. It might sound brutal, but I'm sorry, but it is. You should be able, when you're having a conversation with this person, you'll be able to pick up straight away whether they're good enough or not. The final coding test is like a reference, if you like. It's like taking references. Can you do this for us? We want to see how efficient you are. We want to see how you think. It's not just whether you can do the job,
Yeah.
because let's be honest, if you put that test at the very end of the process, they can do the job. They wouldn't get there otherwise. It's, does your method of working matches with us? And how well can we work? If we're going to come back to you to criticize your coding, how well do you take that? How
Hmm.
well do you take feedback with us? How is your approach? So that's when the coding test would actually be useful. Absolutely, 100%. But not at the very start, especially when talking to senior candidates, if you like,
Yeah.
or more experienced candidates. But not at the very start. At the very start, you've probably lost the candidate before they even apply, if you ask them to do it, because they do take it as an insult. Like, you're not even looking at my profile and you're asking me to do something now when you haven't even spoken with me.
I saw one, and this this poor data scientist was made to do something. They literally stayed up for about like 30 hours filling this test that required like loads and loads of calculations and this, that, and the other. I was like, this is an obscene amount on the hope that you get through to the next stage. And if you were having to do this 8 times a week, there's absolutely no way. Like, it'd be completely demoralizing.
Yeah,
They happen to need a
especially
visa.
when you're
That's
not
why
going to
they
get a
did
guarantee
it.
out of it. And
Yes.
and the tests aren't really. The most hilarious one I've actually had was with a very big organization, actually. Huge organization. I'm not going to mention who they are, obviously, for obvious reasons. I'm not going to mention who they are. And just to highlight, we no longer work with that organization. We just no longer do. They approached us because they wanted to actually access to that awesome startup, and they wanted to change who they are. They're a very, very old organization, but they're trying to change who they are, reinvent themselves. And they approached us. And the funny thing is, they were requiring the people to do a test before they even speak to the hiring manager. They had to do a test that some of them, don't have the tech expertise to use that specific platform. They've never done it before. And they're aware of that as a company. They're like, yeah, of course, we know the testing platform is actually not really relevant to the job at all, but this is what we're doing it on. It baffled us for a second, and we were like, okay, so this person can do the job. You want to interview them, but you want them to do the work on this platform, which they've never used before, which is not really relevant to them either. Yes, that's right. It was as bad as that. Or another organization that refuses to even chat with the person unless they've completed a 2 to 3 hour test, and then they'll decide whether they want to chat with them or not. And who's to decide? It was all AI based, and not all of it AI based. Sorry, the person who looks at the scores, if you like, how they get scored, is the recruiter internally, and that person, if they've hit a certain score, they'll pass them. If they haven't, then they won't. But the reality is, they've actually ended up turning down some seriously good developers because of that, and they weren't willing to change it. It's mind-baffling. It's mind-blowing, actually. It's baffling. We no longer work with either of them. But it's, this is the wrong way to use coding tests. It doesn't make sense. I really don't understand why those companies, for example, don't change that. Well, not just these two, but others like them. Why don't they change how they do things? I have no idea. I don't understand it.
But I think this is the benefit of having community, because then you understand people in a more nuanced fashion. I mean, again, if you're just trying to stack people and match them as quickly as possible, and you in the middle don't have any tech experience, and I can understand why, of course, you want to cart over a coding test, because you think, well, I don't know how to evaluate this. I want to make sure that everybody's a 6, 7, or 8 plus, and then I've done my job. But I don't know that person. I don't know them socially. I don't know what their aspiration. I don't know anything more about them. I have more context.
I have no idea who they are. Yeah, you don't know anything about that person. You are looking at literally a piece of paper and a number, whether that person did a good job or not on that test. But who's to say that even the test itself is right? Who's even put that test in the first place? You question that. You can't not question it. But yeah, it's crazy, and that's obviously how where I suppose we as a community come in, because we have the understanding. We know these people. We know our community members, and if we don't know them, we have almost 15,000 people. We don't know every single one of them by as a person, but we know them all, and we chat with them. And when we have a conversation with one, we know whether they can fit into that specific startup, and that startup would be a match for them, whether it's a match, whether they're a match or not, rather than just, oh yeah, piece of paper, pass it. It's not how hiring should be done, specifically in tech. It cannot be done like that. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reinvent that, especially for the startup world.
So with that in mind, hopefully people have heard the value proposition here, and it's a great community. The Silicon Roundabout community is not going anywhere, and it's only going to get bigger and stronger.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been around for 10 years almost. Hopefully another 10.
Yeah, and I fully see that, and you're established to the name. So if people want to get in touch with you to try and get hold of your community, what should they do?
Let's go on the community website, siliconroundabout.tech. Yeah, simple as that. Or find me or Francesco on LinkedIn. But if you go on our website, and it's literally, it's all there in layman's term. They can just reach out to us, communicate with us, say what they want, for example, if they want to. And what we've done is to keep up with the community ethos. any organization. They don't even need to use our service, if you like. They don't need us. They just come in, create a profile, post a free advert on the actual website, which will reach the community members. It's our way of giving back to the community. Still, we are still a community at the end of the day. But if they need our services, by all means, they can reach out to us, fill the form. If they don't want to fill the form, that's fine. Just reach out to us directly, and we'll reach back to them, and we help them out like we do continuously.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and awesome. Hopefully, people see this as a resource well worth using, and I'm excited to see where it grows to.
Fantastic. So are we. Hopefully, changing, like I said, reinvent tech hiring in the startup world.